Let's talk now to Domitilla Sagramoso, an expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Welcome. Now, the Kremlin has confirmed that a Russian delegation will be in Istanbul on Thursday for possible direct talks with Ukraine. What do you think Russia wants to achieve with these talks?
I think sort of on the immediate front, what Russia wants to make sure is to send a message to Donald Trump that they are ready to engage in talks, that they are not against peaceful negotiations, and that they're not sort of the wrong party in these sort of efforts at reaching a peaceful settlement of the war. But of course, more deeply, what Russia wants to achieve is certain key strategic objectives, which it has defined from the start of the war, namely to ensure, for example, that Russia is allowed to keep the territories that it currently occupies, including a recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. Of course, as was mentioned several times, the desire to change the regime in Kiev and replace Zelenskyy with someone who is more amenable to reaching an agreement. There's also a desire to ensure that there is some kind of demilitarization of Ukraine and that Ukraine remains neutral and not a member of NATO. But these are very maximalist positions. So it's very hard to imagine how any kind of negotiations on this front can make progress. What Russia also is trying to make sure is that there isn't a sort of a ceasefire unconditionally being implemented and negotiations then following, which could delay themselves, because this is sort of the Ukrainian plan, which is supported by Europe and to a certain extent by the United States, this idea to introduce a ceasefire first and then start the negotiations. But Russia thinks that it is in sort of on the ground, that it has the initiative in terms of advancing on the ground in Ukraine. So any sort of freezing of the situation on the ground is seen as giving the advantage to Kiev. So for obvious reasons, they are trying to avoid that. However, they're also suffering massively in terms of casualties. So it's not clear how long they can continue with this war. I mean, I think that we need to take that into account as well.
Meanwhile, European Union countries have agreed to a 17th package of sanctions against Russia. Is Putin feeling the pressure given measures like these?
Yes, I mean, in a way, Russia has managed to bypass many of these sanctions with, as we know, they sort of ghost tanker fleet where sanctions have now been additionally imposed by the European Union. You know, in a way, it has managed to find markets for its main energy products in China and in India, among others. But of course, you know, any additional pressure is problematic for the Kremlin. And this explains why in all the negotiations, Russia is trying to lift the sanctions. And if we recall the efforts that were carried out last month, there seemed to be a readiness by the United States to slowly start lifting the sanctions. But this is really not very promising because, you know, this is a kind of pressure that the West can exert on Russia. But the problem with sanctions is that they don't always have an immediate effect. They have an effect sometimes long-term, and the expectation is that the economy may really run out of steam and that there is real pressure. I think that we have to wait and see how effective the implementation of these sanctions are, and what we used to call, or we call like secondary sanctions. That means the countries that are not directly affected, but are purchasing Russian energy. And I think there is a package now being discussed by the French foreign minister, apparently with the American Senator Lindsey Graham, of introducing very significant sanctions. I think it's like 500% sort of tariffs on countries that are purchasing Russian oil. But this is really hard to implement. Also, if we think, you know, China is one of the biggest countries buying, India as well. And we've just seen the challenges of implementing these kind of sanctions more generally. And that would also apply to energy, to the energy sector. So I think the implementation is a problem sometimes with these kind of initiatives.
We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Domitilla Sagramoso, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.